Carrie will not be joining us. She's in Zion. So it's unlikely she'll join us. Hold on a second. Okay. Okay, this week or this month, I'm going to be looking at the right agenda. We could, can we approve the minutes of for our October meeting? Do I have a motion?
I'll move we approve the meetings, the minutes from the October meeting.
Yes.
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor, raise your hand. Opposed? Abstain? Okay, the minutes are approved. Do we have anybody in the waiting room for public comment?
I don't see any participants other than everyone who's already been admitted.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to mention that we sent out a letter from the CAC, but also including the town board and the Parks and Recreation and the Power Plant Committee, thanking Governor Hochul. Who else do we got here? Assembly Person Anna Kellis, Basil Segos, Carl Taylor, and Pam Helming. And we actually got a response back from Pam, which I forwarded to people. So thanks, everybody. I think it was great that this Bell Station thing is moving along.
Yeah.
My understanding is that Andy Zepp and NYSEG are negotiating as we speak. So
Great.
I think the sooner that transfer happens, the better. Anyways, I just wanted to mention that. No real discussion on that. Okay, let's move on to the overlay district for the Cuba Lake Scenic Byway. I hope people had a chance to look at what Karen sent out. And I know there were some comments about it.
Were there? I don't know that there actually were. Carrie wrote to me separately and indicated that she, I can't even remember what it was. It was something minor about wanting Ridge Road or Lake Ridge Road labeled,
right.
but
Yeah.
it wasn't substantive to the. To the whole
I sent something out to you. Did you get that, Karen?
I'm not sure I did, Tom. Do you want to tell everybody?
No.
Hey, could we share the maps you made on the screen?
Yeah, do you want to go ahead and put that up? And I will look for what I sent to Karen. Okay, what I sent was, I thought there was nothing special from the town line, the northern town line to pass the power lines. That was number 1, 2, and 3.
Oh, would it be okay? Karen, if I showed the maps?
Yes, please do. And then
I
I
don't know if she
mentioned,
can hear us. But
that Lake Ridge Road west of 1 would be good to include that because it's one of our distinctive views. Then I said, once past the power lines at number 4 to number 11, I thought were all good.
What do you mean by all good? And I also wanted, could you just back up about the Lake Ridge Road thing? The scenic byway is 34B, right? So what do you, I guess I'm not clear on what you mean. It should be included.
Well, we would include Ridge Road as part of the buffer zone.
I don't understand why it's not even visible for most of the way from the highway with leaf off.
No, it's true. So, well, we could take it out, but it's so close to the scenic byway. It would almost make more sense that was part of the scenic byway, but it's not. You're right. It's not.
It's not. And I thought that what we were doing was putting, looking at this and analyzing what the characteristics in terms of width of the scenic byway ought to be. And so we're really looking at the scenic byway. We're not adding roads to the scenic byway. Scenic byway is a scenic byway.
Okay.
Yeah.
I kind of see where you're coming from about adding it, because for those of us who live in this area, it's a very common shortcut up to Aurora and is, a beautiful scenery. But I agree with Karen that maybe we shouldn't digress from sticking to the scenic byway. So I take that shortcut all the time going up to Aurora, but
Yeah, I think all of us do.
Okay. We can eliminate any discussion of that area, although it is, as you say, most people go that route. So you wanted to hear my comments. So let me just go through them, and then the last one ends with the width. So once past the power lines near site number 4 to 11, I thought was all an excellent area in terms of, a prime part of the scenic byway. And I did note that at number 8 is basically where the new dollar store is proposed on the east side of 34B. It's about 1,000 feet past Emmons Road, north of Emmons Road.
You're saying you think that 1,000 feet as far south as 10 is okay at 1,000 feet. Is that what you're saying?
No.
I'm saying from 4 to 11. I'm not saying anything about the width at this point. Okay, I'm just saying that the area from 4 to 11 is, I think, an exceptional part of the scenic byway, or a very good part of the byway. And then from 12 to 17, I thought was also a very scenic part of the scenic byway. 18 to 20, I thought was good as opposed to previously being very good. And then 21, Rogues Harbor is historic. And then from number 22 and 23, I didn't think was anything special because of all the development that's already there. At 24, I thought that was good. And from 25 to 31, I thought was very good. And then I said more restrictive regulation, 1,000 feet from 34B East Shore Drive might be a hard sell. 500-foot setback would reduce immediate impact and probably would be less contentious with landowners. 1,000 feet, and then this is a question, would it 1,000 feet on the lakeside and 500 feet on the east side of 34B and East Lake Road make sense? So those were just my comments.
Okay, thanks. And actually, I'm remembering now, it's just been a really crazy month. Robin, you had a few comments also, right?
Yeah, I was trying to remember like what I actually put in the email versus what I had one comment that I think I did not put in there that I was hesitant to contribute, which was that I was discussing this with a friend who lives in Lansing and trying to get, like her perspective on what do you think is a reasonable setback for a scenic, scenic view. Like we happened to be driving to Pennsylvania and I said, what do you, this road is scenic. How far off of this road do you think of as being scenic? And she thought that, wider was better. And she mentioned that this is just kind of more a comment on like what I think of as the text of part of the overlay, which is that she was much more concerned about commercial buildings and commercial districts than individual houses. We discussed the idea of like, well, just people having like unscenic or messy houses or, multifamily homes strike you as unscenic, because that part of the language was kind of on my mind. So we were talking about that. And she's like, no, I think, like a rural house with a bunch of tractor parts in the yard is just part of, the rural character. And I don't mind seeing farm stuff and I don't mind seeing houses or even multifamily homes. It's really the commercial stuff that she considered to be like a blight on a scenic drive. So we weren't driving this particular route, but I just thought it was a good opportunity to get some input from somebody who lives in Lansing. And that was more of a comment on the text part of it, which we haven't really discussed as much. I don't know if it makes sense to alter the text of it, but for what it's worth, at least one person seemed to think that the text should come down more stringent on the commercial development versus individual houses. I talked a little bit about what kind of restrictions does she think is reasonable, as a resident of Lansing. And, she brought up some things that seem to be much more permissive than what the language of it is right now. And so we had a discussion about, well, why are multifamily homes barred from living on the scenic route? And we had some discussion about it. I mean, it's one person, one data point, but I did make an effort to try to think through this with somebody who lives in Lansing and cares about Lansing. So I think it does still bother me a little bit, the text part of it that goes with it. And I didn't put that in the email. I think it's maybe worth revising some of the text. But as far as the width, I thought 1,000 feet. I looked at your visibility analysis and it looked like, 1,000 feet, and that was going to capture more of it, but not even most of it. So I was favoring the wider width just because it seemed to capture more of your visibility analysis. And there was one point where that wasn't true, like around 0.29. But for the most part, it didn't look to me from the analysis that 500 feet was going to capture any majority of the view. And maybe that's also, maybe 1,000 feet is too restrictive. I think Tom and maybe Karen emailed back to say that was unlikely to be popular, but that's my take on it, is that I would go for the 1,000 feet, just thinking about what makes a drive scenic and having done a scenic drive recently. And then I would like to maybe make some comments on the text part of it, where all of these stipulations are on private residences. I think those might also strike the public ear as being kind of restrictive when people tend to want to have more freedom about what they can build with their private residence.
DJ had said that the private residences, we can't really do much about that. I mean, that private residential properties, people can build there if they want, correct? I mean,
In the text part of it, there was a stipulation that only single family homes could be built, which means not even a duplex would be allowed. That seems kind of harsh. I don't know if I'm interpreting that correctly or not, though.
I haven't looked at
Seemed
that.
to
No,
look alarmed at that.
I would like to make changes to the text, absolutely. And that's something that I was hoping we could move on next after really thinking through the geographic extent. So thank you so much. Those are marvelous maps that Karen made. So I would say, as far as the text goes, I think that it will be helpful to get a recommendation to planning board and the town board and kind of talk them through this part of it. If you'd like, that's one option before moving on to text edits. So just putting it out there.
Can you, CJ, could you send the text around again? I'm looking all over for it and I am not finding it. I'm really sorry.
Well, I haven't actually drafted any text from this. We just kind of cobbled some pieces together. So we could call that the text. I think that's reasonable.
The thing I'm referring to was like, they had to use certain building materials and the house had to have the air conditioning unit in the backyard, not the front yard. The driveway had to enter from the side or the back. There were a lot of really stringent sounding things that.
Is that the moratorium you're talking about?
Yeah, I don't think we're on the same page as what document we're talking about.
But I did
I
see the thing.
thought that was related to this.
It definitely was. I remember seeing it.
Did you read it, John?
Does
Yeah,
anybody have a copy?
I think it was back in, it might have been late August or early September when it
Oh,
came out. Because I wasn't at the last meeting, but I'm sure I read it prior to that meeting.
Yeah, there was some stuff in there about farms too, right? Farm buildings and.
Right, yeah. Which most of those weren't affected much.
I'm happy to try to dredge it back up and maybe just add a few little comments to it. They weren't substantive, but now just kind of hearing this feedback from my friend, I'm thinking that probably most people are going to, I don't know, most people, but a lot of people might be much more perturbed on their scenic drive by mass buildings and shopping centers and commercial enterprises than actual private residences. If I'm interpreting that one person's feedback, that's how I interpret it, that it's buildings that like commercially, like a Dollar General or a big old Walmart or some super center or something like that is going to be much more.
Yeah, and Robin, what
an
about like
issue.
the apartment complexes we see going up along Warren Road? Is that considered commercial?
Well, we kind of talked about a little bit about the equity aspect of just saying only single family homes of 2 stories or up to 2 stories are allowed. I thought that was a little separate issue, I guess, from the commercial thing. To me, it was more of like an access and equity thing than a commercial building. I guess maybe you could consider a giant apartment building to be a commercial building. That's probably fair enough. But I also feel like it might be problematic to just say that only single family homes can be built there. I mean, that's barring any.
I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. I don't know, how many stories. I think there's plenty of, there's places where there's 2-story, like kind of series of condos and stuff together. That it doesn't bother me. And I think that's very important for having that kind of access to that level of housing. So should not be restricted.
I think some of it makes sense. Like if you're going to build a big apartment or a duplex or whatever it is, it should probably blend into the scenery. There could be a height limit. There could be some of those stipulations were reasonable, like not having neon signage or big signage, but you don't necessarily have to be so restrictive that only single family homes can be built there. Going forward. I'm trying to think of what place you mean on Warren Road.
Right at the very north end of the Warren Road, there's like a whole series of apartment complexes that have gone up.
Village Solars.
And it's not that they're not tasteful, but they would definitely get in the way of the view. I mean, this is where I think Tom is right too. Like the west side of that corridor that's where our views are. The east side, maybe less so. So if you were going to skew the buffer, you probably want to like try and get people out of the way, looking across the lake as opposed to looking back into the landscape. I think that's what you were saying, Tom, about a bigger buffer on one side.
I was wondering if, Tom, you meant by your kind of point by point analysis, if you were thinking of more of a variable width buffer as opposed to a straight buffer.
Well, CJ sounded like she was interested in particular places along the scenic byway that are the most important to protect in terms of the view. Is that right, CJ?
Yeah, and I think yes and no. So I think we're trying to think about the uniformity of the applicability. It's kind of like our foundational concept in zoning here. And so I think the question is the variable width buffer accurate enough to be pretty readily enforced? I think that is the ultimate question for me. And I was wondering, to follow up on what Tom said, Karen, did you happen to do any combining of the layers, the visibility layers in on your maps? Maybe I'm not asking really the right question.
Combining
No,
how? What do you mean?
Yeah, like with any kind of like I don't know, maybe like eastern parameter on it, but almost like a variable to the west. That it could be an interesting solution.
But I guess I'm not understanding what you're.
Well,
Like,
so if I can give so CJ, I don't know exactly where you're going, but like, would there be a topo line we might follow on the west side, and that everything be below that, we would be less restrictive than above that because it wouldn't be in the way of the view shed.
Oh, I think that would be so hard to enforce.
I agree.
I mean, distance from center line, we can do that. And even distance from center line varying a little bit over the course of the road, we can do that. But if we're like, doing this serpentine in and out and in and out and in and out, I think it's going to irritate people and it's going to be confusing and it's going to be really hard to enforce.
Yeah, I totally agree, Karen. But would there be a way to like look at the topo lines and say, okay, like here's where our ideal thing would be, and this is on average X number of feet from the road?
Oh yeah, I mean, I could do that. You mean pick a place where there's sort of a vanishing point?
Yeah, something where like, okay, if you plug in a building below this elevation, it wouldn't get in the way of the view. But I don't know what that would be. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Though we have to come back to some sort of like legally defensible distance. I don't think we can just. I think when you start making it too wiggly, yeah, that becomes weird.
It can be variable, I would say, because we do have the ability to, even if I guess, we end up going to just some cloud hosted system by the county, at least everyone would be able to go in there and see the map and measure it. So I think, the maps now are a bit more dynamic rather than, just like a static paper zoning map. So it could be, now that these are a bit more accessible, just broadly, right? I think we could, add some variability within reason. Like for instance, the L1 and the RA have variable distances all the way down the lakeshore. So, yeah.
So Todd, I'm just to follow up on what you are suggesting. I don't know whether you have the PDF in front of you, but I happen to have it open right now to site 11, and there's a, like, just to the west of the little number 11, there's something that, it kind of looks like it could be a topo line. It's fairly smooth, and we could, yeah. I mean, that might be interesting. It looks like it's probably, that looks like about 2,000 feet from the center line there, but then that would, continue to be.
Yeah, no, and again,
longer
I'm spitballing here, so don't take anything I say.
Yeah. But I mean, as like from 11, as you go north from there, it doesn't really show a whole lot more. And this, I also want to say that this draft that we're looking at is like the most visible possible potential, like bare ground, scorched earth, and this is not taking into account hedgerows and vegetation, and so this is overly optimistic right now.
Right.
So just
topography.
remember that. And so and we talked about that, I think, at the last meeting, that, like, yeah, I could do it with vegetation, but maybe not all at once then, but maybe now's the time for another stab at it and put some more stuff in, like those contour lines. Just thinking.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking too, and I think Tom brought up a good point that, like, to one side that is where most of the views are, and so maybe that's the side we want to protect. I was also wondering, and this, the scenic byway doesn't have to be Route 34B, because if you take if at like point 2, you kind of head down towards Aurora. That's kind of nice. Like, if I was going to make the scenic byway, I would like take that route instead of continuing north to Auburn on 34B. But that maybe just complicates things.
Yeah, we were talking about that, but isn't the scenic byway, isn't that like designated by somebody other than us already, and it's kind of cast in stone?
Oh, okay, good. Then you know more than I do.
Yeah,
Do you know, CJ, do you know where did that get decided?
I think it's the DOT's designation. They're the ones that come
okay.
up with the byway plans. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, absolutely. Then that's an untouchable variable. I guess.
Just a comment I have on the east versus west views. So I drive this up and down this highway all the time. I live, several miles north of Myers, and go north south all the time. And when I look east, I really appreciate the farmland that's not all buildings the whole way down, and the nice agricultural landscapes are a big part of the scenery. And then also when you're looking the other way, having that open landscape and then seeing the lake is different than, for example, as I go from my home, which is kind of near where Algerine comes into 34B, if I go south towards, towards the town of Lansing and Ithaca, you get to a part where there's actually a lot of trees on both sides of the road already. I mean, there's just a bit of vegetation. It's nice. It's a beautiful, it isn't until you get past Lansingville Road, and you get to close to where we're making that turn now to get around the detour at Ludlowville Road, you see in front of you a beautiful landscape, a long view, a big, long, open view straight ahead of you as you go from Lansingville Road, cross that, and proceed south to Ludlowville Road. So I've noticed that as a particularly kind of, really nice kind of nice view there, but it's kind of straight ahead of you. But there's a lot on the sides as I go to work. It's nice. It's just that I don't see where 500 versus 1,000 feet is going to make, or certainly beyond 1,000 feet is going to make much difference there. I mean, it's already, I can't see beyond the trees on the sides of the road for the most part. There's houses back there and driveways and occasional houses. And,
Yeah, I agree. I used to run that, looking down that road as you go down, just straight ahead. It's beautiful.
One other thing I wanted to mention is, especially this time of year, I'm really, we all think, I think we all notice this more, is being able to look across the lake to see the fall color of the hillside across the lake is a pretty huge thing. And people come up to this area just to see the fall color. And so I was trying to think about, if we had a 500 versus 1,000 foot, is there something somebody could put in there that would obstruct that view? And it would have to be, I think, something pretty tall. So I don't know. Part of the scenic byway to me is, especially this time of year, is actually, even if you don't see the blue of the lake, you see the hillside on the side and, across the lake, you see the west side of the lake. And that's an important piece of the scenery to remember. But I'm not sure whether we make it 500 or 1,000 or whatever. It's really more the height of the actual highway there versus the topography, going down to, anyway, so.
Yeah, that's, I think that's a really good point, David, too, that, even if you put a really large barn, let's say 2,000 feet back from the highway, it isn't going to look that big and take up that big of the, of the view. But I think what we're really, at least the way I'm approaching this, is we want to come up with some guidelines that will be the basis of this overlay district. And, if somebody's going to put a dollar store in, they're not going to build it on a side road that's, a half a mile back from Route 34B. It's just not good business sense, right? So they'll go somewhere else, not on our scenic byway. So I think just want to be more succinct about it than I is coming out. But I think that for commercial entities that might try to build along this way, just having the overlay district itself is a disincentive, because it's not in their interest to build 1,000 feet back, because they're just not going to get customers.
Yeah, I agree there. I mean, I really think it's the commercial thing. I think Robin brought that up too, about it's the commercial buildings that are kind of an issue. And, so there could be something, I think there would be nothing wrong with having something that fits really nicely near the road, but it would have to be kind of, like I don't know, restaurant.
I had a question for
stores,
CJ.
neon signs, not what we're thinking of. Yeah.
CJ, if we make criteria for the scenic byway, and it already exists, but we're sort of saying this is what we'd like it to stay or be, what happens at the planning board level when the Dollar General, which has put in an application already on 34B, how much of what we say now, or, the town board has to approve this, so it's going to be a couple of months, will impact that? Or will they turn around and say, none of this was there when we put in our application, so heck with you guys, we can do anything we want?
Well, it's hard to comment on projects that are undergoing discretionary review at the moment, because we have to consider the rules that are in place at the time of the application, right? But that said, I think the planning board actually is, working to, I would say, do better design review, better site plan review on projects moving forward. So I guess I would probably say I would defer to our planning board liaison to that question about the review of the project itself. But I did want to ask about commercial here, but
Does the planning board have any power to say that, hey, we already have one in Lansing, we don't need a second one? You don't have any ability to just say, say veto?
No,
I really think it's redundant, but anyway, that's aside from the main topic here.
we have two Dollar Generals. There's
We
one
already
on,
have two. This is a third.
yes. There's a new one that just opened on 34 across from the fire station
So,
in North Lansing.
I don't know if I've seen that one.
And if you drive on 34 to North Lansing, it's on the left, right across from the fire station.
And you wouldn't have known it until like a week or two ago. They've got the sign up now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And it says it's open. And the one they're proposing for 34B looks just like that one. So if you want to get an idea of what it might look like.
well, if I could go back to Robin's point just for a moment on the commercial areas, Karen has done a marvelous job by calling out each of the locations in this kind of context. And I'm wondering if you guys can tell me where along the scenic byway these numbers could represent where commercial would you think would be okay, and then where absolutely would not. That is a really interesting question, because it sounds like I'm hearing from people, some commercial services are great. Wouldn't it be cool to have, a little restaurant? Like I remember somebody saying something like a restaurant or something like that. And then also, oh, what about, whatever retail store, and oh, there could be some multifamily housing that would be cool. But I think what no one wants to envision like a whole, route, dare I say, I live in the city, but Route 13 corridor of, stuff all the way to the county line, right? But where would some of it be appropriate? And I think that's where Karen's maps do a marvelous job, is that if we can go through here now and establish where you have the highest scenic value, and then also where either by virtue of population or traditional centers, like the area around Emmons is a little bit of a hub, like it's like a little bit of a, settlement, right? So it's like, where along these 31 points, where would it be like, yeah, that's cool. Like maybe that would, something could like land there, right? Like almost like a floating zone. And then where would it definitely be like, absolutely not, like this could be residential, but at a very low density, or agricultural, of course. I think that's maybe what I'm hearing. And I think you guys have kind of solved this.
So like we mentioned earlier, I think Tom had mentioned, like where the power line are prevalent, some commercial stuff there might be acceptable, because already it's not quite so scenic.
By Bell Station.
Yeah.
Well, we may not want that near Bell.
Yeah,
Station.
no, yeah, I've got Bell Station.
I disagree with that. I don't have any problems with the power line. They're there. They've been there forever. They're going to continue being there. I would not take that out and say, oh no, anything can happen there. And I also agree with CJ that where Emmons meets 34B, there's been a bar, not so much restaurant, but a bar there forever.
That's
And
a
then
little
there's
bar that sells like
storage
beer
unit.
and clams or whatever they are. I
Yeah.
never want to try their clams. I don't trust their
Well,
clams.
And then right across the street from them is the storage units. And then just right up the road is the Lansingville Fire Department, which happens to be, I think, pretty good looking. But that area is a little bit developed already. And then the third Dollar General that we probably will have is you count 3 or 4 houses north of the bar, and there's going to be a Dollar General. It would be nice to think it's not going to be smack on the road, that it would be set back, but I don't know if we can say that. And, the parking would be set back. I heard a quote from the big CEO of Dollar General. He wants one every 5 miles all over the United States. So he's definitely doing it in Lansing,
Wow.
which is really sad. Very sad.
Which side of the road is the Dollar General proposed for?
On the east side.
East side,
Well, that's better than the alternative.
probably.
So that's kind of another consideration too, like Mandra's saying, perhaps some commercial would be best placed largely on the east side of the scenic byway, and then within these specific kind of development areas, right? And maybe in other areas where there's not as much of a view, but I think if that's an exercise you'd be willing to do or provide feedback on, I think that we've more or less nailed it. I think that I think that would really help, and it's clear definitions. It's it's very uniform in its application. It's like based on a legitimate rationale. I'll try to find a link to the other dollar store that was approved, and I'll drop the link in there so you can see the rendering of it if you haven't been over there yet. But
And see that the one in North Lansing is also now in a little tiny commercial area, since there's been a restaurant up there for a while and then it closed and now it's open. And the Lansingville Fire Department, so it's right across, not Lansingville, North Lansing Fire Department. The Dollar General is right across from it. So there's another little sort of commercial park, plus Cargill Salt has right off 34 going north on the left. They have a big storage with just incredible piles of salt and trucks. And so that's another little place. And I guess it's not so horrible that they stay in the little semi-developed places instead of just in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of farmland. Of course,
That's spreading them out everywhere for sure.
excuse me?
It's better that than spreading them out everywhere for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like
Right, and
the direction this is going. It sounds good.
Back to the 500 versus 1,000, thinking more on the east side, because that's probably where there's more of the farmland. Just in terms of what Karen is able to do, and I don't know if she has the time to do it, but knowing what you can really see versus what the current rendering is, it's as if there was absolutely, nothing on the terrain at all. And so how much would there be beyond 500 in a lot of these places to begin with? And why regulate it beyond that if it's not even going to be visible, and you're just taking the chance of annoying a whole lot of landowners for something that nobody's really ever going to be able to see?
Yeah,
That's a
I mean,
really good question. Yeah.
some of it's gonna, some of it is gonna look somewhat similar to what you've got in front of you here, because, you could probably see through leaves, once the leaves are down off the trees. But yeah, no, it's a really, I think it's a very reasonable suggestion, John, and I'll render the whole thing with, the best I can guess with, estimating tree heights. It's going to be kind of an average, but at least if there's a deciduous forest, I'll make the trees 60 or 70 feet high. And if it's a farm field, it'll be 1 foot. And that's as good as we can do.
That'd be great. But it seems to me that it's really hard to decide these distance questions, because there be things that we certainly might be very unhappy with if they were 50 feet off the road, and whereas if they were 300 or 600 or 900 feet away, they might not be a problem. It's really hard.
Well, it sounds like it needs to be far enough away that it would disincentivize box stores from wanting to be there in the first place. So that's
exactly.
the case.
And that might get us out of some of this difficulty. as has been pointed out, if they're not ever going, if nothing like that is going to show up 300 feet off the road anyway, except maybe on a side road, and even there, that seems unlikely, doesn't it? Because the traffic doesn't go there. And
Yeah, absolutely, because they have to get, I mean, at the very least, they have to get delivery vehicles in, which is why, you know, that Dandy Mart up across from Rose Harbor, why that was such a, you know, a good corner for getting trucks in and out. And, you know, there's a turn radius that they need to get those big 18-wheelers into the dollar stores. And so they're not, you know, they're not going to do that on Jerry Smith Road.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's
I don't know if you can just go by the size of a building either. I mean, a farm building, for instance, might be a fairly big building, but you know, it's farmland. What do you expect? And if it's 300 feet off the road, a fairly big building might be just a nice part of the scenery. I don't know. It's it's hard to make blanket, you know, criteria here.
Right. And with agriculture too, I mean, you've got ag and markets, and it's an ag district, so it's not like we can say you can't build a barn here.
Right.
That's
Right.
out of the loop anyway.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I do like that.
Oh, go ahead.
The clusters, identifying some clusters of places where commercial would be appropriate. I mean, I think we already came up with 2 or 3, and that, you know, just that's a handful of those would be good. And I think the ones identified made a lot of sense to me. So
Yeah. How would we help make sure that happens? How would we frame our recommendations to help that happen?
I mean, well, we can say certainly that, you know, it should not be random where commercial activities are going. Start with that, and then about where there's already been some natural clustering, and minimize, you know, have some constraint on the expansion of that too, so we're not getting a huge pile on of things. But I don't know.
Then you have to have, if we identify this area, then there has to be someone that's willing to give up that property for that
Right.
activity also.
Yeah.
Which may or may not limit what, you know, I guess if there's enough money, maybe anybody would go for whatever they're trying to push. But.
Right.
And do we distinguish between a dollar store and a Salt Point Brewery? Are those both commercial?
Yes,
Well,
but
Salt
One is
Point Brewery's not
which
along
is-
the byway, is it?
Even
so
I was just thinking,
not on the
if
bottom.
if somebody wanted to put something like that out on there, would a Salt Point Brewery be considered commercial? The same way we're thinking about a dollar store.
Yeah, this is something I've thought about too, this kind of thing, but then I always come back to, well, these are my favorite kind of things, and somebody else might have their favorite.
Yeah,
I'd like to see wineries and breweries, I guess, in good restaurants, if there's going to be any commercial things, but some other people might want, you know, more dollar stores. I don't know.
I mean, I agree with David that if we should be encouraging small business and local business in Ithaca and Tompkins County and everywhere in America, but you know, we have to have some box stores. But the language, if you look at the link that that I put in the chat that was worked up, I think it looks like between just a small group of people, didn't say there couldn't be any commercial business, but that if it was going to be built, it had to adhere to these design and aesthetic principles. So it's not saying you can't have a dollar store. It's not going to, it might prevent dollar stores from building there if they're not willing to abide by the design principles, but it sounded to me like they could still build it, and as long as it fit into the design aesthetic of the guidelines, that it would still be allowed, unless it was some egregiously tall or wide building, but they didn't say there were no buildings of a commercial nature allowed. And that is just a draft. It does say draft, so that's not set in stone. But.
Right, and this is a guideline, and if it is something that is egregiously tall, that somehow they were able to figure out how to get it in a place where we were not being so strident about, it's up to, the different boards also to weigh in on this and how permits are granted. So it's not entirely up to us. I mean, we can provide guidance with this, but it's a multi-step process, which in this case is a really good thing.
Hey, could I jump in with a couple questions? I wanted to ask Todd what it is about Salt Point Brewery. Are you talking about the use? Are you talking about the form of the building? Are you talking about its shape and massing, or how close it is to the road? All of the above?
No, I was thinking that these kind of individual local businesses, they kind of try and fit into the community, as opposed to like box stores, dollar stores, where you kind of got this thing gets stamped out. And so it was more of an aesthetic thing. And I think Robin answered that pretty well, although I think setting up an aesthetic guideline is kind of as complicated as the goofy variable width buffer thing that we were discussing earlier. So it's a slippery slope. But that's all I was thinking, was like, this looks like it fit into the landscape and wouldn't necessarily be a hindrance to our views.
Yeah, that really integrates into the landscape, I think, that place. And by the way, that little breakfast place that was mentioned that's across from the dollar store, I happened to just go in there, my wife and I, today for the first time, and they have great food, all kind of sourced. So that's the kind of, it's a young couple that own it and they live in the area. And, that's rather than having a Denny's, let's say, there's a big difference. So I don't know how we, to the extent we can, stray away from like chain store type things. I don't know if we can prejudice our, that way, but that's kind of my preference, is a local place that's really working on locally sourced food and yada, yada, yada. And yeah, so.
You're talking about, is that Momo's that you're talking about?
It's the place that was a bar and now it's just been turned,
not Linda's.
It's called something Roadhouse.
East Shore Roadhouse.
East Shore Roadhouse it's called.
Old Flint's. Yeah.
There was a bar with occasional live music, but now, and it's kind of a beer place. But now it's a really, I had really, the food was fantastic. Anyway, I don't want to overdo it. It was really great food for a reasonable price and locally sourced.
Oh, great.
It's called what? East Shore Roadhouse?
Yeah. It's right across from that dollar store. It's just down the road, going down 30 from Rogues Harbor.
It's across from the post office.
Just half a mile down from Rogues Harbor. Yeah.
Corner of Drake Road and East Shore Drive.
Yeah. But anyway, I thought, anyway, that's kind of a really nice local business. And again, locally sourced, supporting all kinds of local people. So.
I suppose there's one other possible distinction, and that could be that something like a restaurant or something that makes use of the view versus something like a box store that could be anywhere. There might be consideration involved there.
Yeah, and that's kind of what the Salt Point Brewery is kind of like that, because they have the picnic tables outside, everything sort of outdoor thing. And
I would be more predisposed to something that takes advantage of the view and gives people a place to appreciate the view than a box store or something like that.
Right.
I don't know if that's possible to do, but
I think a lot of you should think about being on the planning board. Consider it.
It does sound like a different. It sounds like a different mechanism involved with that than the scenic byway.
That's true, Robin, but they have the biggest pull. They have the power. And, little by little, people on the planning board, it has to change and other people will be appointed. Tom knows that. But you guys sound like planners.
I mean, I guess I'm just saying, I think that would be some other kind of town document or rule that says we only want local businesses or certain kinds of businesses. It doesn't sound like the purview of a scenic byway to.
Well, can we?
I vote for Robin.
Couldn't we do something that kind of the wording would be, we create a document that has some wording that's kind of focused on the spirit of what we have in mind, keep it sort of.
You could ask the IDA.
Huh?
Could ask the IDA. The IDA might be interested in something like that, offering some kind of abatement or tax incentive to businesses that fit that specific criteria within the byway. They can, issue property tax abatements and mortgage tax abatements and things like that. So municipalities such as the town of Lansing has one for the town center area, but there's no reason why you couldn't do another one. I mean, it's a little bit outside of the normal recommendation for a conservation advisory council, but you certainly can pass it along with the mapping information to the planning board as a consideration, as kind of a way to ask the town to consider and county to consider incentivizing specific local businesses. We do it right now with the town center zone. So anyway, just an idea. Karen, could I ask you a quick question? I was wondering if you would, when you brought in, we're doing this extra round of analysis that folks have suggested. I was wondering if you would consider also bringing in the building footprint layer with that, what you thought of that, and if we could maybe see how many existing affected structures there would
Yeah,
be.
sure.
What do you think of that?
Sure.
So I'm wondering if, I defer to Tom and kind of how you would want to direct people to give feedback, but I was wondering maybe if everyone would consider traveling the 31 points and making recommendations on those points as far as the kind of acceptable uses. And when I mean that, keep it broad, like commercial or not, like we could kind of start that. That's a pretty good, I think, I think I understand what you're saying. I mean, I'm hearing things like limits on height, lot coverage, limitations for building footprints, requirements to submit massing and renderings in the scenic byway if it's going to be some kind of commercial use. So I think you're tailoring the form already, and the uses will start to follow. They'll start to kind of, I think, appear on their own. I think they're start to become very evident once you can kind of say, yeah, I could see something here, or absolutely not, this would be awful. And Karen, I'm also wondering if you could in the map, maybe a couple of them show parcel data, and then also maybe how they might be delineated. Are you thinking some kind of like buffer around each number? Or are you thinking just, how would you think about separating those between, 1, 2, 3, 4?
Oh,
if needed?
I think that's going to be completely dependent on the topography. I don't think it's
Okay.
going to be a standard, right? So those were just
Cool.
Those numbers were just thrown down there at about half-mile intervals, just to not make it too much work, but still give, an overview. So.
And so
Okay, well,
CJ,
thanks
just
for this feedback, everyone.
just for clarification, you want us to drive the scenic byway, except for the bridge where we can't do it, and send feedback to you or to Tom and Carrie, or what exactly are we looking for from this exercise? I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. This was just an idea. I'm open to other ideas. That just seemed, it seems like we had gotten some good kind of qualitative and quantitative data by really visiting the sites. And so this seemed kind of a way to maybe hone that just a little bit further. If you'd like to just respond to, I mean, Tom, how do you have a preference for how you want everybody to communicate their thoughts on this? Just reply all on the email? Or?
I would send it to everybody and include CJ.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what everybody else comes up with too. So that'd be good.
So when I drove through there, 18 to 20 seemed like an area that would be better suited for development than 12 to 17 or 25 to 31. Those seem to me like really prime areas.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
my-
see
my
how
comments
much.
And 22 and 23, that area south of Rogues Harbor, I mean, that's already developed. So that's a good place to put more stuff if you can squeeze it in. But yeah,
We all pretty much agree on those things.
Yeah, it's interesting.
so yes, if people want to do that and send your thoughts to everybody on the CAC and include CJ for sure.
And maybe if it strikes you, say something about how far away in both directions in those places, that rather than just saying this is a good place. That might help us with our thinking about widths. Get some idea. You know, would it matter if there was something 500 feet away here, if it's a good place, for instance, if you notice things like that.
When do we need to have this decision so that somebody can be looking at it besides us? When are they looking for the recommendation?
So in terms of planning board or a town board, we can certainly bring up the scope here. Hold on just a second. I think we have scope for this.
While CJ's looking that up, I just want to circle back to something John said, and John and Andrew are probably the people best placed to do this. It would be great if whatever we come up with is something that preserves something that everybody in Lansing wants preserved without pissing off people who aren't going to do anything anyway. Like, why make regulations suddenly on farmland that, that's going to be a cornfield for the next 50 years. Like, why? So I think, anyways, I think that's something we want to be cognizant of as we draw these things up.
Sure.
So I would envision if you guys can get the map to where you want to make a recommendation, we can then start working on the text and get that to the town board. I think from here, I think it should go to the planning board and dare I say the ag committee also. I think they should have some input in this, as well as fire and highway, and the departments also get a review of any kind of text or map changes or things like that. So I was hoping to kind of package it all together more towards the end of the year. So you have some time to still work through it. But that said, I think your recommendations as far as what I'm hearing about things like commercial, I did put a screenshot of the prior Dollar General that was approved recently that's about to open on Auburn Road. And so I think what I'm trying to say is you have you provided some good insights here that I'm happy to pass on, and I'm sure Tom will to the planning board, just as general guidance about your observations about the scenic byway, which you're obviously looking at as part of this project. So I don't think it's immaterial to the current planning board review is what I'm trying to say. So if we can get the maps where you want it, we can start to dig in on the text while planning board is reviewing those maps, and I think then we can get moving on the text here, hopefully, December or January. If that sounds reasonable.
So the width of the overlay is, I mean, that just is really challenging from my perspective. And 1,000 feet is, I mean, that's arbitrary. 500 feet is arbitrary. It's a tough one, and I'm still not sure how we deal with that.
I am now just hearing CJ say that it has to go through all these other people, and I hear concerns about overreach in this group, but I also feel like there's going to be lots of other entities that are going to look at this, and we might want to build in that buffer. Like if we start with 500 feet, we don't have anywhere to go if people want compromise, or other groups like DOT demand compromise. We don't have anywhere to go from there, because 250 feet or any, that's not going to cover very much of anything.
You're like a negotiator. You're like
put my negotiator hat on and say they're almost, maybe it's overreach, but it's also kind of giving us some wiggle room to compromise. If we start out with our most minimum acceptable thing and say that we're not willing to budge on it, that's going to be annoying too, right? Or are people going to want to, is the overreach such a concern that you think people are going to feel like we're overreaching no matter what the minimum is, and we're going to want to bargain down from that? I guess that's my feeling, is if we start it with 500 and put that out there and it's not readily accepted, we don't have a lot of space to go negotiating with.
Well, I mean, it's going to be a recommendation.
Right.
It doesn't carry much weight beyond that. That's my understanding.
Do you mean the whole byway overlay doesn't carry any weight? For the CAC, I mean, we're going to offer them a recommendation, and the town board ultimately is going to decide. Once they do decide, though, it has some regulatory weight. It's not just a recommendation.
If they pass a law that says this is what's allowed in the overlay district.
This is just a recommendation. Why are we even talking about this? It's just
because we should make a recommendation to the planning board and the town board.
Yeah, it's just our attempt to influence the town board, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, at some point, if it becomes policy, it would be enforceable.
Right.
Yes. Right.
It's just not our decision.
Right.
We could say.
Yeah, I understand that. Maybe I misunderstood where you were going with that. That it would never be more than that.
Robin, the town board created this CAC, and they want recommendations, and they want you to have an influence. But to be an influence, it takes stages. And Tom is right that if we decide this is what we wish, we probably will make a new law. This is it. This is what's going to happen on the scenic byway. But if CAC never does anything about it, never recommends anything, we're going back to square one.
No, I understand that.
Whatever.
I understand. I thought Tom's comment was a bit flippant and didn't understand what he was going at with that being.
What this group is doing is very, very important, because we never had a group that did anything like this before. It really is very important. So don't ever think it isn't what you're doing.
But I do, going back to the overreach, I do, for those of you who are on the town board, you would know more than me, but if they repeatedly feel that we're always coming in with something that's quite extreme, then we would start to be ignored.
That's right. No, but you're not. You're not. I'm on the town board. I know the feeling of the town board, and we're going to have a new member on our board.
Okay, so I'll go with Robin. Let's go for it.
So this is good. All what you're doing is like super, super good. And and they're going to listen. The town board is going to listen. Is every single member going to agree? No, but you're probably going to get the majority. So what you're doing is really, really good, Robin, really good.
So if there are things we really care about, we should say so.
Yeah, I guess I just maybe I'm gonna still say the 1,000 feet just because it's a scenic byway and most of the views are long and distant. I don't want to anticipate pushback and anticipate that they're going to bristle at the recommendation. Let's just put it out there and they can react to it.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Robin, and I also hear Tom's point. Like, we just chose 500 and 1,000 because we deal with, those are the number systems we deal with. There's no science behind that. That's why I was kind of hoping that there was something we could do with topography, and there was some sort of a more unbiased assessment we could do. Or that, when I say we, I meant Karen.
No, that means you too. You're the thinker of this.
But yeah, it's nice if we can always come back and say, oh yeah, we thought about it. Or I mean, Karen can also like look at the 1,000-foot buffer and say, what if I put in houses that are 1-story, 2-story, all at the edge of that buffer? Does that impede our view? I mean, I think there's some ways we can do this. Again, Karen can do this analysis that give us more legitimacy than we just simply made up these two buffer sizes.
I mean, honestly, I think that the 1,000 feet is going to really do a great job at this, and the impact looking west is going to be pretty. I don't think it's going to be glaring. I mean, unless there's something like and this is probably covered by zoning, but if there's like a lit stock car race track or a go-kart track or something like that would be, like if the circus comes to town and stays in a field like that, then that could be a real problem. But I think individually, probably stuff beyond 1,000 feet is not going to have a huge impact on the view.
I think that's great with your spatial analysis and Rob writing up the text for how the rationale behind all this. That's kind of, I think, what sells it to the board.
Yeah, I admitted in my email comments that I don't have a good understanding of what 1,000 feet means at every point along the thing. My understanding was that it would be too confusing to have a serpentine shaped buffer that would say you can 500 feet here and 1,000 feet there. So my understanding of the width is not science-based at all. It's just as arbitrary as the recommendation draft so far. But I do think the views are long. We know intuitively that the views are long, and in my unexpert opinion, it makes sense to go as big as possible. And if people want to push back, we can hear that feedback, but I don't understand starting from the smallest width that we've considered.
Yeah, except where there's farmland, as John brought up, where we're just sort of like imposing a buffer that where there really is no need to even like impose anything, because it's just going to be cropland for a long time.
Well, I mean, what about solar? Is solar a real, that seems to be a real thing that's happening now, and we could have solar all along it if that is what.
But we have nothing. If it's large solar, then we'll have no input on that anyway, because that's New York State's dictating that now.
Right.
It would only be a small installation that we would have any input.
We'll have some. I do want to say that we will have influence on the exhibits. We'll have local agency funding to be able to comment on them, and the scenic inventory and this work, it will be shared with those developers, and they'll have to show good reason for why they're not complying with it or how they're going to mitigate some kind of impact. So yeah, absolutely, John. I don't mean that wasn't meant to be argumentative, only that the town does intend to make sure that we have a seat at the table for sure on the review process. So
So let's just imagine a 1,000-foot buffer on both sides of the road. And then the next step is to drive along the road and decide which parts you would like to have pretty much stay as they are and which parts you could allow commercial development. Is that what we're going for?
I guess I'm not entirely understanding that, because if it's a continuous buffer, are you suggesting that places where the development is acceptable will be cookie cut out of the overlay, or how does that work?
Well, if you're going to have
exempted,
if you're going to have commercial development along it, and you cannot, I don't think you can say no commercial development at all on this route, within 1,000 feet of the road. If you are going to have some commercial development, where do you want it? That's seems what CJ is after, right?
We truly dictate that, or could we just recommend, and I don't mean us, but the planning board or the town, can they say this plot cannot have any commercial development?
Yeah,
Can it be a
Yeah.
recommendation?
it could be a requirement, especially in agricultural district. Now, of course, value added ag, that's a different story, and any kind of protected agricultural use, of which there are a myriad. But yeah, absolutely. The town can restrict commercial development. There's no question. It's some of the very foundations of zoning as a concept. Yeah.
So are
And
people,
I was going to say the town can also, in some place like the scenic byway where you've established an aesthetic basis for having things like materials requirements, massing restrictions, height restrictions. I mean, you can say, we want this to be X color or a muted type of color. We want it to have a peaked roof that's such and such a pitch. These are all legitimate form criteria that the town can dictate if they wish, especially somewhere like a scenic overlay. And it might be best really that level of regulation not necessarily apply all throughout the town. Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe it's not. I mean, we have to look at that for each area, but right now focusing on the scenic corridor, yeah, absolutely. The town definitely has the authority to do that. Now, whether everyone wants that or not, that's why it takes a little while to hash zoning out,
so are people happy with starting out with 1,000-foot buffer?
I'm good with that.
Okay.
Go drive along it and see if I can get some sense of what that really means, that 1,000 feet, when you actually are there and look at it. Yeah.
Okay, so there's we've accomplished something here. We have 1,000-foot buffer. So now let's decide where it would be good to allow commercial development and where it would be good not to allow it. Does that sound reasonable to everybody?
Can we do that?
That sounds
after
good.
the walkthrough of assessing the points, basically,
Sure.
when we do that individually?
So CJ, are you happy where this is going?
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys have done all this awesome work. I'm just kind of asking questions. So thank you all for everything that you're doing to really think through this. I think it's turning into a really well-honed project. I would say, if you're going out there with somebody who's willing to maybe hold the map, or you could ask them to go stand maybe in, within reason, no egregious trespassing, but it might be kind of fun to see 500 and 1,000 feet from be safe parking along the road and all that, and be mindful of traffic and everything. But might be a fun and interesting exercise to see what in real life that looks like, even at the human scale. I guess it's probably going to be really illuminating, and really focus on those areas where you think it would be appropriate. And if you did want to break it down into different commercial uses, say commercial uses that were, I don't know, maybe light commercial or like small commercial, maybe versus, I mean, I think on the scenic byway, no one's going to be recommending anything larger than, 10,000 square feet, I'm sure, for any type of, project that goes along there. But if there are places that you think, could benefit by whatever the disposition, the building or use therein benefiting a lot from the view, that could be really cool, because that could be something to really incorporate into some kind of the abatement or incentive district, like I was talking about. Maybe that's for later on, but it just could be a really interesting kind of just data point to think through. So thank you all. I really super appreciate this, because I'm mostly in front of this computer. So thank you for getting out and seeing Lansing.
I actually have a range finder, which if anybody wanted to borrow that while you're out, that's really easy to use, and you'd be able to do it basically from the shoulder of the road. You could just shoot out and know where those points really are. And
I was just thinking about trying to get a rangefinder from my husband's work and see if we could take it out. Otherwise, it's just so hard to like imagine where that is.
Right.
Yeah, I have a tape measure. I'm just gonna have my kids stand in the middle of the road at one end of it, and I'll walk out. And see where that is.
but it helps with the trespass part too.
So light commercial,
Most people know how long a football field is. There's a unit of measurement for you. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't watch football. You might have to tell me.
300 feet.
So 3 football fields.
Okay.
Right.
so light commercial, I mean, Dollar General would be light commercial, is that right?
I guess.
I was thinking more like what you guys were saying with the kind of the, I don't know, almost like homegrown deal, local food kind of cool thing. Like,
But that Dollar General, isn't it less than 10,000 square feet? Just slightly?
yeah, but I was thinking, maybe even smaller type of, pop-ups, or like you guys were saying restaurants. It sounds like restaurants could be like restaurants, taverns, the brewery, winery thing could be like very, yeah, I guess what I mean to say is like maybe, stores, retail, that kind of commercial, or, vehicle repair maybe could even fall to that, versus maybe some like things like, I don't know, people always say things like coffee shops or something that the suggestion of incentivizing in a bunch of different directions uses that take advantage of the view, I think is really inspired. So I don't know, however you want to run with that, whatever recommendations you think might be helpful for that. You could just feedback, just data points. So we'll see where it goes. Thank you.
So hopefully by the next meeting, everybody will have done this, and in the next meeting, we can decide where light commercial can go and where we prefer leaving it alone. Does that sound reasonable? Okay, so by the end of the next meeting, we should at least have, we wouldn't have the text, but we would have the map that would, we could pass on to whoever of what we're proposing.
It sounds good.
Okay, does anybody have anything more to say about this overlay zone? Okay. Okay, number 6, open space index. David, do you have would you like to lead this conversation?
I can start us off. I've haven't done, probably homework I should have done on this. I've been I'm also I'm the chair of the Cuyahoga Lake Watershed Network, and we're hiring a new executive director, and we just developed a new climate change component to our website. So I've been pretty busy with that. But I did go through well, I went through the town of Bethlehem's, their open space plan, and got a little familiar with that stuff. I'm not sure what my mission was, is to, I can just based pretty much from what I've seen there, it's nicely laid out in terms of steps that they took. Want me to go through some of that?
Sure.
Okay. Can I share my screen? I could pull up that document. What I have is the town of Bethlehem open space plan document. I could pull that up and I can quickly go through just some pages that cover their steps. And it's just a little bit of like what we're getting ourselves into, which is a lot. But I'm gonna hire consultants hopefully to help us with it. Okay, so let me do that. I'll share my screen here and see if I can find it now in my documents. Okay. Go here. CAC, open space index. Okay. Yeah, so this, I think we've all gotten a copy of this, and Town of Bethlehem open space plan. And well, just on page 2 is what I'm looking for here. I'm sorry, your guys' little faces are getting in my way here. Okay. Yeah, page 2 here kind of goes through a little bit of, what some of the things they did. So they had an updated townwide open space inventory database, value maps. They divided the types of open spaces into these categories, which would be somewhat similar to what we would do. Very complicated, and they have a long list of data-driven conservation criteria. And I'll move on to the pages that get into a little bit of details with this. And then really developing, here comes Karen Edelstein's help again, a GIS conservation analysis tool, but I guess we would be using consultants for this work. So putting a lot of that into a GIS conservation. So those are kind of just a basic starting point. So we've already done our, natural resources inventory. So we have that to start with. I assume we would work with that a lot, right? I mean, that would really be a starting point for us on this to some way. And from that, we might want to break open, and talk about different, how we want to divide up some of the open spaces that we might have different concerns about in terms of level of conservation, et cetera, et cetera. And then really coming in with conservation criteria, and then getting all of this into a conservation analysis tool, which kind of eludes me the real details of that, but it's something a way to really prioritize. If anything comes up, a way of prioritizing. So that's kind of the basic things. So I'll pull this forward to get into a little bit of detail on some of these 3 things. So those are the 3 key steps. Then they have then there's really, how is this going to be implemented in terms of regulations and different tools that a town board has at its disposal to impose some of this, to make this all really work and implement it as a planning tool. They have a nice section on public engagement and how they went about that. And so that's something we would also need to be thinking about all along. We would probably want to have some level of public engagement sooner rather than later. And they have some really good stuff there. And then finally, at the end of this, it's a 43-page document, this thing. At the end, they have some considerations of dedicated funding for open space conservation. So some ways of how you know, I guess a municipality or working with people like Finger Lakes Land Trust, et cetera, might help protect some of this stuff. So let me just zip along to, let me see here. Let me move on to page, I've got page 9 marked here as something that had something good. Let me just move along here. This is actually on my way here. This is page 4. This is like some background intro info of their document. Kind of interesting, useful for us to think about, interesting to read. You know, the pros and the cons of why you want to even go through this process, why a community wants to do this. So in terms of public engagement, it's like a place to you know, engage the public on why we're thinking about this, et cetera. But let me move on to page 9, which is really got into a little bit of the specifics of the process, a little bit more. Sorry, let's see. Well, let me just go on to page 10. Okay, so the process, open space planning, open space inventory. So, yeah, so this just begins this whole thing. So it goes through each of these, kind of some introduction. Again, this is sort of repeating the 3 steps here. This is on page 9 of this document. So an updated town open space inventory and database with some value maps, the conservation criteria, and then getting all this into a GIS actual analysis tool. So you know, a lot of work involved in that. Let me jump ahead just to step 1, page 10, starts with step 1. And so explains what is meant by this open space conservation value maps, gathering inventories. I think we are partway there from what we've already done with our natural resources inventory. But it is like we said, how do we want to kind of divide up our open spaces? How do we want to characterize them, the words we want to use? I mean, we don't have the Hudson River, we have Cayuga Lake. So anyway, just some things to think about. So just seems like that's step 1. Step 2, pages 13 to 15. Gets into this conservation criteria, developing an objective rating system for open space lands, and just thinking about, you know, the discussion we were just having about the scenic byway. This is just, you know, much more complicated than that to think about, you know, just all of us going through this exercise of, you know, what are the criteria we're going to use. And it's interesting to look at what they came up with. Again, I've got to move your faces around, but so it's got, you know, just some you know, adjacent to conserved land, adjacent to conservation easements, adjacent to bicycle, pedestrian, private networks. They've just thought of everything here. They've got a long, it's not just, you know, a wildlife corridor or something we all might think of. So there's the usual suspects, but it's interesting to look through this in terms of they came up with a lot. I mean, it goes on. Yeah. So just an interesting example. I think they've really done a Cadillac job of criteria. So that could take us quite some time, and doesn't seem like it's something that we can actually, this doesn't seem like something we could pass on to a consultant group so well. I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that, but it seems like when we get to like the GIS analysis tool, that's something consultants could do. But here I think is something where probably would take a lot of our time to really come up with that. And so they have a whole way of scoring it. You know, this may be, you know, they're like a great example, I think. And I don't know if we can live up to their example, but anyway, they've done it. So here's the conservation analysis tool. And I just only glanced through this because it kind of lost me, and I had a lot of other things I was doing as well. But so this is obviously, though, just to get things digitized, provide a tool that with a limited amount of training, someone new working with the town board or town board members could use it when things come up, that sort of thing. And so, but the guts of it would probably take some people with, you know, very special skills, I think, to pull this together. And let's see, they have, what page am I on here? Let's see.
17.
Yeah, 16. Yeah. So, yeah, so they just provide some examples here of, you can see some example maps and all of that. There's a flow chart of how the GIS system analysis works. You know, it's, you know, just, it's quite something. That's all I can say. But it'd be cool to have this, I guess. So that's the core of it. Those are the three main steps. Again, it's coming up with the open space conservation value maps, really the inventory of what we've got, the types of open spaces we have, where they are, developing those conservation criteria, an objective rating system, and then putting all this into this tool. And then, you know, how are we going to implement this? And this is something where really, well, people like members of some of those of you who are on the town board or CJ or others who really know what some of the possibilities are. There's conservation easements, of course, is talked about, but partnerships of various kinds. And there's some creative ideas here too, voluntary participation. So I think the public engagement is something before we even get too far down the road with our step one. You know, we have not really, as we know, had lots of attendees at our meetings, you know, our CAC meetings. But I think when we get into this, it might be a place where we really want to try to attract some folks to our meetings to make sure we're getting some real public engagement and some outreach to get that engagement going from the outset. So we don't develop this cool tool and throw it out there. And, you know, we have tremendously negative kickback from the community because they felt like they were never on board with this process, and this group of a few people, you know, we're developing all this without their input. So that's a place, you know, we might even, before we do step one, look carefully about that. Yeah, that's about it. Then this stuff about some dedicated funding. And I think these things, that's something I think, not myself, but some of you already have a fair amount of knowledge about, and we have people who can help us with providing some of this. And this is more part of just the implementation part, which is, you know, I think for us, it's those three steps and the public engagement and is the place to start. But of course, also making sure we aren't designing a system that would be almost hopeless to actually implement. So we need, you know, input from those in the know to make sure we aren't being too ambitious or too developing something that's too complex or whatever that could not be implemented. But I don't think we have to. The implementation is not a place to start, obviously. So we've got to. So anyway, that's all. That's the only bit of my homework I've done, is enough to maybe some of you have actually read this more carefully than me and can say more about it. But that's what I learned and share with you. So let me stop sharing And
That's really
Yeah,
great,
this is
David.
all
Thanks.
about.
Thanks so much for summarizing that.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you emphasized the public input piece, and we can just all start having like our own little private rituals that COVID is over soon, so that public input can actually happen in an engaged and lively way, because there's so much information that can come out of it. And I've participated in a lot of these types of events, both in city and regional planning in grad school, and and also other places. But it's just to speak to their tool and their rating system, they're doing something called suitability analysis, and I've done quite a bit of it. It's really interesting what patterns start to pop out. And one of the basic, really important guidelines in undertaking that kind of suitability analysis is that you have very, very broad inputs, so you capture a range of how people value different areas. And if you don't do that, exactly as you mentioned, you imperil buy-in, so that what the last thing that you want is somebody sitting in an office somewhere, maybe even outside of Tompkins County, putting values on parts of the landscape that we are the ones who are familiar with, and there's going to be a range of different values that some people may really prefer forests to farm fields, and that and you're going to find people who are going to have the exact opposite. But it's so important to capture that plurality, so that you can actually make valid, so that you can apply valid ratings to the different cover types and places. So I just hope that it's not an exercise that is rushed through. I think it probably should have more time than we're anticipating it will. Like, I'm thinking more on the in terms of like a 2-year thing than a 6-month thing in order to do it right.
Yeah, the public engagement kind of, I've done, a lot of extension, a lot of outreach in my career. And so dealing with contentious issues, even today, I suppose climate change is still a little contentious, although maybe not after our extreme flooding we just had here. Finally understanding, but I kind of enjoy that, but you really have to take the time to understand where different people are coming from and have a very empathetic, understanding of what, where people's values are coming from. So it's a little, I wonder how we would orchestrate those meetings, because they can get, if it's not done right, obviously it could turn into a real mess and have people, especially in today's, we're a bit about today's climate on politics, it could have something really getting really messy. So we might need a little bit of consultant help there as well, even though I've had a fair amount of experience with this, not for this kind of exercise. So we might get someone, either just someone who's done this sort of thing before and gone through this, or actually have somebody outside of ourselves running the meeting, so we're not getting tomatoes thrown at us. We're just, we're there to listen, and somebody from outside of our group is who's kind of outside the community even comes in and tries to elicit input from the community, instead of us doing it and getting defensive about our positions and our values and all of that. I don't know, but
right. No, I agree. And 10 meetings of 10 people each will probably, in many cases, be more productive than a room full of 100 people.
Yeah.
So it's very, very labor intensive, but it can be extremely valuable.
Yeah, and I think one thing is trying to lay the groundwork too of, with the environmental work I've done in the past, it's this thing of touching this nerve, which most people, you can find it there if you're broad enough, a nerve where they really do value the place where they live. They get, they things that they value about the place they live. And, they really love it, and you want to protect what you love, so you really have to bring out that. It's a very, you have to get to that emotional level with people where I think that kind of common ground of why do we all stay in the Finger Lakes? Why are we here? And why do we like it here? So anyway, tricky stuff, but interesting. So that's all I have, Tom. I mean, that's all I can do.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. That was great. And I couldn't agree more with trying to get some public input at the beginning. It becomes, you have to have buy-in from a lot more people than just us. So CJ, are we going to get $10,000 to mess around with?
Yeah, so the budget is going for approval, or actually it was, sorry, that was last night, jeez, by the town board. And I'm also put in the application for Park Foundation for the balance of what I assumed was a pretty substantial project, which I think, obviously I'm open to insights on the scope prepared, or modifications of the scope, as well as the budget that you think we may need. But let me go to that. Hold on just a moment. Proposal. Okay, so I think we estimated a total project cost. And this was after having a couple of phone calls just about the scope of the work, just to make sure I was, mostly on it. But I estimated this type of plan to be a cost of $68,500, with $10,000 committed from the town, with a Park Foundation request of $58,500. So we'll wait to hear back from them. Obviously, that would make the project feasible. So I think it sounds like the folks are really interested in this approach that David just summarized for us. So if that's the case, then I'll do my best with Park Foundation, and we'll let you know about the grant. It's kind of the best I can do right now.
So in the meantime, should we try and start on step one, since we have the NRI to work from, and get some kind of broad outline of what we think is important in the town, and then from there try to, I'm not sure how we would do it, but how would we do the public engagement?
So I think the first step would be to select the firm. I think, well, the reason why I'm saying, maybe just hold off until we determine whether we won the money or not. Just because that's kind of, we could rewrite the scope of work or reimagine it for both scenarios, but give me a chance to see if we can secure that money, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because it sounds like that you want a fairly robust public engagement process. I made that clear, when speaking to a bunch of consultants. And it also seems like you would really like a lot of the deep dive, GIS deep dive and data that we can then continue to use and make available to the public. So, and I think it's obviously a very valuable project into the town, and so I'd like to make sure that it's what you want, and if that's what you want, then I'd like to try to get the funding for it. So I don't know. It's just my take on it. But if you'd like to just go ahead with something, I'm just not prepared to answer that question right now.
Well, maybe we should just look at the NRI and see what part of that people think would be useful for us, for starting with step one.
Yeah, sounds like a good place to start.
Okay. Well, thanks, David. That was great. So, let's see. Conservation easements is number 7. How are we doing here? What time? It's almost 8:30, so we should probably try to move right along. So I hope people had a chance to look at Robin's criteria, which look very similar to David's criteria. But you modified it somewhat for Lansing.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like from the context that David presented that this same kind of rubric could be used to find and target areas for conservation that the town would like to conserve. But I was approaching this from the angle that people would approach us, the CAC, and ask for their property to become an easement. And Karen pointed out early on in this process that we didn't have any criteria for evaluating that, and the town has limited resources. So I was approaching it from that framework of like, we would be screening applicants as opposed to, but it could work in both directions, that this is also a tool that we use to quantify how important a space is for conservation, even if they don't approach the CAC about it. So I was looking at it from that framework, and realizing we have just run out of time here. I hope people had a chance to look at it. Maybe we can focus the few remaining minutes on just creating a subcommittee and seeing if anybody wants to be part of it rather than dissecting it, because there are 25 different pieces of it that we would have to get into, which maybe we don't want to do at this late hour. Maybe that's work for the subcommittee. I will say that the criteria that pop up a lot have to do with water and wetlands and flooding and floodplains and tributaries and streams. So a water person would be helpful on the committee. In addition to, or alternately, it's clear that these are very quantitative and will require some kind of GIS skill set to analyze this. Like, do we know where the areas are for important rare animals and plants? I mean, we'd have to have some kind of GIS layer to determine that. So if somebody with those skill sets wants to be on the subcommittee, that would be great. Or maybe everybody can just review it and send feedback. But
well, I'd be happy to help you with the GIS part of it. And, I did manage all of the conservation easement monitoring for the land trust for many, many years.
okay.
So I know a little bit, I know a lot of it about conservation easements. And I think it's a really great list. I just, there are a few things that I don't think fall under conservation, particularly the adjacency to public schools, which was line 12 and line 7. Those are the only two that I think are straying from the focus that we should have, which is really, it really should be about more natural settings for conservation.
Yeah, there are some lines in there about, being close to a registered historic district or pedestrian pathway, things that don't necessarily need to be conserved in and of themselves, but might represent access or more likely to be used if it's near a school, or maybe more likely to be used
Yeah,
it's-
except if they're conservation easements, they're privately owned and there is absolutely no requirement. In fact, usually the easement property owners prefer that there's not public access. So
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I think that's it. Just because there's a conservation easement does not mean that it is publicly accessible. And I mean, it's one of the reasons why, for example, the land trust does not put signage up around conservation easements, simply because it's people's private property and they're not meant to,
Okay.
it's not meant to be an open invitation.
I see.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
will,
so-
whittling down this list would would make it much easier to use as a tool. So anything that can go, it sounds like we need Karen's expertise on this subcommittee. I have no expertise or experience with conservation easements. I was thinking of this as a tool that we would use. So far, we don't have any applicants, so I don't think there's a huge rush on getting this finalized. But you know, if we receive another one that might be sort of questionable or small acreage with not many of these features, this would be a tool that we could all use to evaluate it, or maybe just the subcommittee. So
Yeah, and I mean, I've got a lot of stuff that I can bring to the table, but I have to say that I'm not a huge fan of the town doing this, and so I might be sort of a wet blanket. Just keep that in mind.
not a fan of the town doing conservation easements at all.
Not at this point. Like I mean, not in favor of the one that was brought forward, and I think that there's I think that there's a lot of evolution that needs to happen in terms of where we are, our readiness, I think, to take something like that on. So
Well,
I don't know, I just want to put that out there. I mean, I think I've said this before anyway, but I am happy to, to offer some insights.
Wouldn't it kind of dovetail with the open space index? Because like if you have that going, then some aspects of implementing that would be the town maybe getting involved more in that.
Yeah. I think
So
that
at
I
that
think
point,
that it
and then
can
we'd have it all. We'd have a whole system for really doing that. So
yeah, I'm not saying absolutely no. I'm just saying that I have a lot of kind of gut level skepticism about jumping in on it right yet.
I'd be very interested to know how you would describe what the situation would be like where the town should start to get involved. What aren't we ready for, and how should we get ready for it if we want to go that way? If I'm making myself at all clear.
Are you asking me?
Yeah. And not for an answer right this second, but it might be something that would be good to understand better.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is Robin starts to get at some of those exact issues, which is how are we, what is our process for evaluating and judging, and what's our big picture plan. Because I agree that there are going to be properties that come up that are not suitable for the land trust, that the town could very easily take on and steward, but not necessarily the first one or the first 2.5 acre one that shows up. I mean, I think that it, in a really, looking at it in a really positive sense, I think a lot of it speaks to our enthusiasm and desire to do good by this. But I'm just also feeling like it's important to kind of get our ducks in line.
If the rubric isn't the first step, then maybe we what is the first step, and do we need this subcommittee right now?
No, I think that it has slowed down, and I think that we're on the right track right now. I think when we were just like, when one got put in front of us, in theory, which wasn't even a real offer for an easement because it couldn't have happened in the time frame that, we were looking at it. I thought that drew me up short for sure.
And I think we all heard you and understood your point to be like, we have no tools in place. And my understanding was this was the first step, was to make this tool, which is sort of a way to say, what our minimums are. And maybe this in its current form isn't doing that, because it doesn't say, we have a minimum acreage of 5 acres or 10 acres or whatever it is. It doesn't do that. So this is, really useful to have, input of like, what is our minimum acreage, or what is the most important thing. If it was maybe 10 or 12 criteria instead of 25, it would certainly be a lot easier to evaluate that. The next time we get one, could say, well, it doesn't have our highest priority things. So I may have been way off and just not modifying this even more to like further weed out the public accessibility part of it. But there's a lot of good points in here about wetlands and highly erodible soils, and some things I'm not sure about. Like, I don't really know how we would know what a groundwater recharge area is. Maybe we don't need that one. So if we as a committee or subcommittee don't know how to implement it, then it's not super useful. So
yeah, and
I would welcome your help.
Yeah, I'd be happy to work on it with you. I'm serious, Robin. I think you do. I think that this is a really, really, really fantastic tool where it is now.
And
Well,
can't-
are we going to go ahead with
and a place to work from?
I guess it's up to Tom and Carrie, really, or maybe somebody other than me to decide if this is a priority, but I'm happy to keep working on the.
Well, I think that's great. Both Robin and Karen, I really appreciate you jumping in on this. And I would say that anybody else that wants to join your subcommittee, to please get in touch with those two and Carrie and I, and let us know what you're up to.
And I'll say right out front, I don't mind asynchronous working. We could work on this document separately, and we don't have to have 2-hour meetings about it.
Speaking of which. Okay. So is that okay if anybody else wants to join you too? They should get in touch with you and
Sure.
And keep us in the loop.
I'm afraid that I have to run. 8:30 is the witching hour for me, so
Okay.
I gotta go. But thank you all.
Well, thank you, Karen.
Sure.
We always
Okay, I'll be in
appreciate
touch.
your input. Okay. So yes, let's try and wrap this up fairly quickly. Number 8, CAC membership. My understanding is that everybody who is up for renewal is interested in staying on. Is that correct? I believe it is. And I believe there's going to be an announcement on the town website about if people want to apply for it. So keep an eye out for that, and we will have to see if there's anybody else interested in joining our committee. So I'm just gonna stop there. There's one more thing: preparation for a 2021 annual report to the DEC. I guess Carrie and I could probably look into doing that. I don't think it's a real big deal. Is that right, CJ? It's a fairly small report. Yeah. Okay. So I assume there's no new business. I think we got enough business going on right now. Okay. So do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Yes. Opposed? Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. We've covered a lot of territory. Again,
Thanks, all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
thank you,
Great work,
CJ and
everybody.
Heather.
Thank you. Thank you, CAC. Appreciate it.